talking about discipleship, and one of the things I think that we need to understand about the nature of being a disciple is that it really informs how we live together. You need to know that I believe in family, not in the way that some people talk about family in the church. But I think there are some things that are important if we talk about what it means to be a family of disciples and how that lives out in our own lives. In 1992, I had the pleasure and the privilege of going to Western Samoa for 2 weeks as part of a mission team to help rebuild after a horrible typhoon had devastated those 4 islands. I have not seen those people now for, what's it been, 21 years, 22 years now. And yet we became family for those 2 weeks, and that is part of who I am. There was a 48-hour period during that 2 weeks that especially stands out in my mind. We got on a ferry and went across to one of the other islands, not the main island, where there was a little village called Osao. And we spent 48 hours there. 4 things happened on that island that I think are important as we understand what it means to be a disciple within the family of God. The first thing is that to live together, to be a disciple, means when we welcome people in or when we welcome each other, we start by being just pretty clear about what the guiding paradigm is for who we are and for our faith. Now, if you were to name the guiding paradigm for that village in one word, it would be respect. Before we did anything else, they got the 12 of us together from this country and they said, now, there's something you need to understand. You're going to spend a lot of time over the next 48 hours sitting on the floor, on a concrete slab, because we don't have chairs, and you will become uncomfortable. There is one thing that we ask you not to do. The greatest sign of disrespect you can show anybody in our culture is to sit in their presence with your legs extended straight out toward them. Great. That's the only way I'm comfortable, sitting on a concrete slab. Thank you very much. But you understand what they did? From the moment you became part of the family, they named the thing that guided who they were, and for them, it was respect for every single individual, and you did everything you could to make sure that that respect was not lessened. Interesting thing about living in community, about being part of the family, about living together. What is the guiding paradigm that brings us together as a church and says, if you really want to know who we are in terms of living together, this is the word that describes it? I don't know what it is for this church. Got some ideas. I was in church one time where the guiding paradigm was location. You didn't sit in Edna's pew. There may be a few people in this congregation who think this is my place because I've always sat here. I don't know. I was in a congregation where the one guiding paradigm seemed to be the faith is for adults. And so if you bring your kids, you take them to the nursery because they're really not, we don't like crying kids in worship. That may have been part of the life of this congregation in the past. I hope not. But you see, one of the things, if we're really going to live together in community as family, we need to be clear. What's the guiding paradigm that we all share? For Western Samoa, it was respect. And then they gave us another gift, and that was the story. Right after we found out, they walked us into a pavilion, open-sided, concrete floor, sat down. For 2 hours, they told us the story of the village in Samoan. And none of us spoke Samoan. And they didn't bother to provide an English translation either. They simply told the story. We asked about that later, and they said, oh, you wouldn't have understood it anyway. Well, what do you mean? They said, well, all we did was name names and dates. And then the people who heard it, who had been part of that story, lived that out in their memory. That's how they relived the story. They said 1950 to 1967, Lloyd Rising. And everybody who was part of the community knew what that meant, right? Everybody that was part of this community at that time knows exactly what that meant. I was in a meeting in this church once, and I said something about the rising room, and they said, "Who is he?" See, one of the gifts that we give each other if we're going to live in community as family, as disciples of Jesus Christ, sharing a common goal, is we've got to be willing to tell the story to each other. I asked them later, I said, how much of that story was bad stuff? And they said, if you got dates and names and people, you got bad stuff. When we invite people into this community of faith, do we only talk about what's right with us, or are we honest enough to say, guess what? Part of our story is we've had some really good fights over the years about things like building and worship times and types of music and this and that and something else. But you see, if we're really going to learn about who we are and about who God is and about how we live in community and relationship with each other, we've got to be willing to share the whole story with each other and with those who are coming in. Third gift that they gave me, interestingly enough, was the gift of a meal. Right after they told the story, we sat there and they fed us lunch. I had never spent a more uncomfortable 30 minutes in my life, and it didn't have anything to do with the concrete. It had to do with the way it was served. They asked the young ladies, and I'm guessing, I'm not good on ages, anywhere between 15 and 25, okay, to serve us the lunch. They came in at one end of the pavilion carrying our plates. And the closer they got to us, the more they bowed down. So by the time they got to us, they were literally almost crawling to hand us the plates. Boy, I was uncomfortable with it. I want to say, stand up! What is this? But you know what? The gift was not just in the food. The gift was in the fact that they came out of a culture and out of an understanding of their faith where it was all about being in servant ministry. And you can't be a servant if you're not willing to humble yourself to others. Maybe even folks who don't deserve it, like me. An amazing thing. Their understanding of discipleship, of learning and of serving was wrapped up in this word humility. A couple of our people tried to get it to quit bowing as they came with the food. And one of the elders of the village pulled them inside and said, no. You're asking them to be somebody that they are not. Because that is basic to who they are. What is basic to us as disciples of Jesus Christ in terms of how we relate not only to each other, but to those who come in these doors from the outside, seeking to know and to understand the love of God. The fourth gift they gave me, I've shared before this congregation, it was the gift of a Bible. I wanted a Bible in Samoan. I was going to buy one. I was given one. The guy that gave it to me could only find two, and he went to look at it. One was the Bible that was given to him when he was ordained in the United Methodist or in the Samoan Methodist Church as pastor. The other was the Bible that was given to his wife and him when they got married. I have their marriage Bible in my office. And the reason was because they clearly understood the faith was never something to be sold, it was something to be given away. And they gave it away. I didn't have to buy anything. See, one of the interesting things I think about living in community, about being family, about living together as disciples of Jesus Christ, and one of the things we're going to explore over the next year is, what is our guiding paradigm? What does it mean in this congregation to be a disciple of Jesus Christ? And what paradigm do we invite people to live out of when we invite them to be disciples with us? One of the things that we want to explore over the next year is, what's the story that we have to tell? Do we know what it is? Not only the story of this congregation, but the larger story and how that fits into God's story. That's what we're going to start on Thursday night, by the way. And can we share that story with others in ways that change their lives and invite them to be the kind of disciples that we hope to be? One of the things that we're going to do over the next year is explore what it means to live together as we give to each other and to God's world, not out of a sense of what we're going to get in return, but out of a sense of humility. That when people walk in these doors or we engage in conversation in this church, we always start with the assumption that We're the servant. And we need to learn just as much as somebody who may have never set foot in a church before. Because every one of us, you see, has something to learn about the gifts of God, and we're going to hear it from other folks. And finally, I suspect that as we explore our discipleship over the next year, what we're going to find out and what we're going to explore, what we're going to hope to discover, is ways that we can simply give the faith away. Simply offer it as a gift to other people. To say, I ain't a disciple yet, folks, but I'm working on it. And I invite you to work on it with me. Together, treating the faith as a gift, we can explore what it means to live in full relationship with God and with each other. Scripture from Micah is an interesting scripture because the posture that Micah uses is not a posture of respect that is sitting. It's a movement. Throughout those verses that Sarah read, it is about the people of God moving, always going someplace they are not to get closer to the mountain of the Lord. Why? It's pretty clear from Micah. So that God can teach them. So that they can be disciples, learners about what it means to be in relationship with God. In Micah, the story is both local and universal. He talks about all the individual peoples of God, but he has them all streaming together to the mountain of the Lord. Where individually they will all sit under their own fig tree, under their own vine, undisturbed, but they will all do that. So that the story is really a story that is both local and universal in scope and pulls us together as individuals. And I suspect that the big gift that Micah talks about is the journey to faith. That on that day, all the peoples of the Lord shall stream to the mountain where God will teach them. And the gift of that faith will be what the choir sang, what you heard. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation will no more make war against nation. One of the other scriptures says, nor ever be trained for war. And everyone will dwell under their own vine and under their own fig tree, undisturbed, and, you ready for this? They shall not be afraid. See, to be disciples of Jesus Christ is to learn that. To go to the mountain and hear God continually tell us that story and work our story into that story. And if you look at what Micah really says, he's really talking about respect for each other. That's how we live together. What Micah is really talking about is not only respect for each other, but a servanthood that is based in humility. That says, I ain't very good. You're not very good. But in our shortfalls as the children of God, we can become disciples to give the faith away. And after that, that's what we're called to do. What the United Methodist Church says is that we are a people who are charged with making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Boy, that's Micah in a nutshell, isn't it? So, we focus on our discipleship, not in terms of what we receive, but on the gifts that we give away, that the kingdom might become a reality. I invite you to stand as you are able.